morning, Year 11. So we are continuing with our work on language this week rather than going back to literature. So how many marks is paper 2 question 4 worth? And what will question 4 ask you to do? Give yourself 5 minutes to answer those questions, then move on to the next slide for the answers. So paper 2 question 4 is worth 16 marks, okay? And what it's going to ask you to do? Well, it's going to ask you to identify the writer's perspectives. It's going to ask you to compare them with each other, and it's going to ask you to think about the methods that have been used to present those perspectives. So basically, how do they feel about the topic? How do you know that? All right. Now, we're not going to answer a paper 2 question 4 because I'm hopeful that we are going to be back together next week so we can do it in class, and I think that'll be a lot easier than you guys doing it at home. So we're going to move on to paper 2 question 5 today, just so you've got a bit of an insight into what it is that they're going to ask you to do for that. And then again, we can write some answers when you come back into the academy. So paper 2 section B is the creative writing section. So on paper 1 you have a creative writing section, on paper 2 you have a creative writing section, and it's worth the same amount of marks. So it's worth 40 marks, and it's split into those two sections, so 24 for content and organisation and 16 for spelling, punctuation and grammar. Now the difference is obviously section B on paper 1 is focused on fiction, so the task it asks you to do is to create a description or a narration, and the idea is, you know, that you are using your imagination and your creativity to create a fictional piece of writing. Obviously, section B on paper 2 is focused on non-fiction sources, and therefore they're going to ask you to write a piece of non-fiction, okay? So what they can do is they can ask you to write a different type of text for a different type of purpose, okay? So they are going to ask you to either write to explain, to instruct or advise, to argue or to persuade, okay? So you might have to explain your point of view on something. You might have to offer instructions and advice on some sort of topic. You might be asked to argue your point of view on a statement, or you might be asked to persuade someone of your point of view. Yeah. The idea is that you are using your non-fiction skills, so your ability to use facts and statistics to prove your point, rather than obviously creating a fictional scenario as such. So with that in mind, this is what the question stems may be, okay? So they might ask you to explain what you think about football, okay? They might ask you to argue the case for or against the statement that the coronavirus is a fictional illness, okay? They might ask you to persuade the writer of the statement that there should be more parks in the local area. They might ask you to advise the reader of the best way to stop smoking. Okay, so there might be different scenarios, but the question stem will always be the same. It will always tell you what the purpose of the text is, okay? And now the second part of this question is that you've then got to write it in a certain style. So you're going to write it for a certain purpose, but you're also going to write it in a certain style. So they might ask you to write a letter, an article, text for a leaflet, text of a speech, or an essay. Okay, now don't panic. We are going to spend today's lesson just going through what those might look like and how you can figure out what the question is asking you specifically. So GAP is a really easy way of you figuring out what the question wants you to do. Okay, so it stands for genre. So what is the type of writing you are going to be doing? So out of that list of things that we've just discussed, so letter, speech, article, text for a leaflet or an essay, which one are they asking you to write? Okay. The audience, so who is the writing aimed at? They'll always tell you that in the question. And then the purpose, so what is the purpose of your writing? Are you arguing? Are you persuading? Are you explaining? Are you informing? And again, it should always say that in the question. So GAP can help you because it can help you to analyse the question and then that can feed into your planning. So if you gap the question first of all, so if you look at it and you identify these three things, that's going to make your answer more accurate. Okay, so I'm going to go on to an example now just to show you how GAP would work. So here is a question. It says, snow seems like it is picturesque, exciting and fun, but in reality it causes accidents, inconvenience and economic destruction. Write an article for a broadsheet newspaper in which you explain your point of view on the issue. Okay, so we're going to gap it. Yeah, so the first one is genre. So what type of text are you writing? Well, right here, it tells you that you are writing an article, okay, for a broadsheet newspaper. So you're writing an article. That's what they want you to produce, okay? A broadsheet newspaper is different to a tabloid. So if you think about the Sun, that is a tabloid, okay? And if you think about the Guardian, that is a broadsheet newspaper. Okay, so a tabloid essentially, you know, takes celebrity news, makes it sound worse than it is, really kind of fictionalizes the events that are happening, whereas the Guardian reports factually on what is happening in society. So the fact that this is asking you to write a broadsheet newspaper says that it needs to be quite a formal piece of writing, and it needs to be sophisticated because the reader is going to be sophisticated. Okay, so we're writing an article for a sophisticated reader, and its purpose is to explain your point of view on the issue. So this statement here about snow seeming like it's picturesque and exciting and fun, but in reality causes accidents, inconvenience and economic disruption, you've got to decide which side of the argument you sit on. So do you think it's picturesque, exciting and fun? Or do you think it causes accidents, inconvenience and economic destruction? And you have then got to explain to the reader why you feel that way. Okay, so we've gapped the question, so we fully understand what this question is asking from us from just a few simple steps. So now what we're going to do is just try and gap a couple of texts. Okay, so first of all, I want to know what genre is this text. So what type of writing is this? So I'm hoping you were all just shouting at me then that these are leaflets. Okay, and leaflets are one of the texts that they can ask you to write. Obviously in the exam you're not going to be expected to colour in titles, draw images, that sort of thing, but the sort of information that's supplied on a leaflet you know, can be quite important and very factual. If we were going to think about an audience then, so this one here is for the face of puppy farming. So I would assume that's going to be aimed at people, you know, who are animal rights activists, people who are interested in the treatment of dogs and want to improve it. So they're obviously trying to persuade the reader, aren't they, to help them to help the dogs. Yeah. And then here, this one about bullying. Again, bullying tends to happen within schools, doesn't it? So we could say that this is aimed at a younger audience. But the idea is to try and persuade you to help anyone who's being bullied and to, you know, direct them to this company to get support for you know, their issue. So what genre is this then? Obviously it's not written in English, is it? But what genre is it? So it's a letter, okay? And again, a letter is something that you can be asked to write, okay? Obviously, because we can't read what it says, it makes it a little bit more difficult. However, I would say that obviously this is quite a formal letter because it's addressed to Sir or Madam. It says that there is an attached copy of the permission form, which makes it feel very formal. And I'm assuming that if it's a permission form, it's probably writing to inform somebody, you know, that somebody would like to take part in whatever it is they're asking for, consent form. Okay, so we've got a letter. So this is what a letter would look like. So what about this one then? What type of text would we say this is? So this is an article. Okay, and we know that because it's got a big bold heading at the top, it's written in columns, you know, we all know what an article looks like. So it says, is yoga a good workout? So who might this be aimed at? Well, it might be aimed at adults who are looking to exercise, or it might be aimed at people who perhaps have never done yoga and are wanting to do yoga, or maybe people who do yoga and are wanting to know the science behind it. But essentially it's going to be aimed at an adult audience, isn't it? And its purpose, well, if it's saying, is yoga a good workout? It's a rhetorical question. I would assume they're trying to persuade you that yoga is a good workout, okay? And they've obviously put at the top, you know, research indicates that the 5,000-year-old practice can help with arthritis, asthma, muscle soreness and flexibility, but calling it a good aerobic workout would be a stretch. So they're obviously saying that it does have some sort of, medical benefits to it. So they're trying to persuade the reader that, it is a good workout in terms of obviously the medical value, but actually as a workout, it might not burn that many calories. Okay then, so have a look at this one for me. Do you know what type of text it is, what genre it is? So this one is a speech. Okay, and it's the I Have a Dream speech, which was written by Martin Luther King, which obviously you should know is the gentleman who began the civil rights movement. So obviously quite a formal speech in style, and it was written for obviously the American public of the time. So that is all we're going to have a think about in today's lesson. So you need to make sure that you are comfortable with gaps. So being able to identify the genre, so what type of text it is, being able to identify who the audience for the text is, and being able to identify its purpose. Those are all going to be really important for feeding into obviously you writing your own piece for this question. There is a Show My Homework quiz, so make sure you complete that, and I'll see you tomorrow for our next lesson.